Hello guys, welcome back. In this lecture, we will discuss about databases theoretically because before start working with databases, relation and SQL queries, we first need to know that what is a database and what is relation and some other useful terms associated with database management system. So let's start with the database first. Okay, so a database is what? Okay, so a database can be referred as collection of data that contains information relevant to an application, and the application can be of any purpose, like it can be an enterprise application or an online e-commerce application, HR and payroll application, social media application, and so on. Okay, so there is no restriction of that, like what kind of application we can use the database. Okay, and for all such application we need to use some database to store data that used within the transaction in that application. Okay, for example, consider a social media application where we usually allow users to create their account and share posts, react on other users' posts, and so on. Okay, so what are these? Like creating a user account. So it is a transaction. When user reacts on some other user's post, this is a transaction. Okay, and all such information from user account details to activities are stored within the database. Okay, and you can take another example as well, like consider an e-commerce application where a user comes and place his or her order and track their own order. Okay, and they can search for the products and so on. Okay, so when they search from the products, what happened that they type any keyword, and based upon that keyword or product name, there are a lot of products come onto the dashboard or on the system, or they can see on that screen. So where it comes from? So it comes from the database, and where it is stored. Okay, so this is how database will be used. Okay, and now the next thing is the relation. What is the relation? So a relation can be referred as the database tables, and it represents the data into the rows and column formats. Okay, where each row represents a record and each column represents an attribute. Okay, and a record is always collection of various attributes. Okay, and these attributes, or sorry, these records are stored within the relation or a table, are used to form an information about object using attributes. Okay, and in terms of object oriented language, what you can say that a relation can be considered as the class, and the rows of the relation or objects of the relation can be considered as the object of the class. Okay, and if you talk about the entity relationship terms, then you can say a relation is the entity set and each row represents a separate entity. Okay, where entity can be a class, and entity set can be a class which contains multiple entity of the same type. Okay, just like in the program object oriented languages, what we can say that a class is a collection of objects of the same type. Okay, now let's have a look that how a table relation look like. So here you can see that this is the table where we have three attributes like ID, name, and email. Okay, and here you can see that we have six rows in this table, and each row, like one Alex Smith and Alex at the rate example.com, every row represents the object. Okay, and all these columns represents the attribute. Okay, and you can consider this table as, let's say, student table or users table. Okay, for example, let's consider it as user table. Okay, so what we can say that this user table has three attributes. Okay, that is ID, name, and email. Okay, and every row represents a single user record. Okay, so here you can see that the first user has ID 1, name Alex Smith, and email is alex at that example.com, and so on for the other user. Okay, and depending upon the needs, you can add constraint to your attributes like not null attribute, unique, and so on. For example, here you can see that ID usually never be null. Okay, so what you can add here, that ID should not be null. Okay, or ID must be unique, so you can add unique and not null constraint to your ID attribute. Okay, and so on. You can do this for other attributes as well. Okay, and we will discuss about the database constraint later in the series. Okay, for now let's switch to the next term, which are database instances and schema. So what are database instance and schema? So once you start working with the database, or in more general terms, you can say that when an application is in use, the database changes over the time as data is inserted or deleted, and the collection of information stored in the database at a particular moment is known as the database instance, and the overall design of the database is known as database schema. A database instance changes frequently, but schema changes infrequently. Why? Because, for example, you can consider it like, suppose you are using a social media application. Okay, and once it is built, there is a very infrequent changes into the user table or post table or activities table. Okay, but there is a frequent changes, like today let's say 10 users created their account, tomorrow 10 other user will create their account, so the state of the application is changes frequently. Okay, not the table structure or not the database structure. So what we can say, that database instance changes frequently but schema changes very infrequently. Okay, now as the last thing for this lecture, let's discuss about the database languages. Okay, database also has some support some languages. Then there are two type of languages that database supports. One is the data definition language, which is called as DDL. Okay, and this is used to define database schema. Okay, and it also used to define the attributes type, like what should be the type of an attribute, like integer, string, text, array, and so on. And it is also used to define the referential integrity. The referential integrity means defining relationship between two tables using a foreign key. Okay, and we will discuss about the referential integrity and foreign key later in the series. Okay, and it also used to define the database constraint for attributes, like unique key constraint, not null constraint, and so on. Okay, on the other hand, data manipulation language or DML is used to access or manipulate the data stored in the database, like inserting records into the database, update existing records, fetch existing records, deleting existing records, and so on. Okay, and we heavily use the data manipulation language. Okay, why? Once we define our database and insert a table into them or create a table into the database, then rest of the work is like using the data manipulation language for creating record, deleting record, updating record, and so on. Okay, and that's it for this lecture. Here we just theoretically covered very few but widely used database terms. Go through the entire lecture and I hope this will help you definitely. Now we will meet into the next lecture where we will see how to create database in Postgres, and we do this practically. Okay. Till then, tata, goodbye, take care and stay safe.